Hi, thanks for watching. Today I'm doing a video on the relationship between faith and reason. So this is going to help particularly with philosophy, and I don't think you would necessarily be asked about this directly in the exam, but it's the sort of thing that is really good to understand, particularly for dialogues, but also for philosophy in general, because it's really helpful for drawing parallels between, for example, Christian ideas and challenges from philosophy, seeing how Christianity sometimes responds to challenges from philosophy, because those sorts of things you can be asked about. So let's have a little look. This matters because quite a lot of the time in 15-mark answers, so evaluation essays, you have to evaluate how successful various religious beliefs are when they're challenged by reason or they're challenged by philosophy. The example that springs to mind for me straight away is David Hume, who comes up a few times in the course. He has lots of challenges to miracles. He has lots of challenges to arguments for the existence of God. We can challenge religious experience using modern science. In the Christianity and science topic, we've got quite a lot about creation theories. They can be challenged by things like the Big Bang Theory. So all of these challenges that I'm talking about here, these are challenges from philosophy and challenges from reason, because philosophy generally works using our reason, so using logic, using arguments that follow a particular chain of reasoning. Religious belief doesn't necessarily work the same way. Religious belief is more sometimes based on the idea that you just know or you just believe. And some people, this is why some people find religion pretty baffling, because they're like, well, how can you know something if there's no proof for it, if there's no evidence, and if it doesn't stand up to reasoned arguments? But the question we've got to ask is religion trying to do that? And if it's not trying to do that, if it's a completely different kind of thing, does it have to be threatened by philosophy or by reason? So this is what we want to get into. So I guess this is the central question for us. What even is religious faith? What's it mainly about? Is it mainly about accepting propositions, or is it about trusting a person or trusting a reality? Now, what I mean by a proposition here is a statement that claims that something is true or false. So what I'm asking overall is religion about accepting that a set of statements are true, and if you believe that all of those statements are true, you belong to that religion? Or is it something different than that? Is it more about putting faith, which obviously can't be proved, in a person, putting faith in an idea, putting faith in a particular view of reality? Or could it be a little bit of both? I think it probably can. So a scholar that it's useful for you to know about, and not on the spec, can't be asked questions about price, but H.H. Price drew this distinction that it's interesting for us to explore here. So he argued that there's a difference between belief that and belief in. So if we're talking about belief that, what we're doing is we're claiming that a proposition is true, that a statement is true. So I'll show you some examples on the next slide. Belief in is a little bit different. This is about showing personal or individual commitment to an idea, to a person, or to a view of reality by believing within yourself that it is trustworthy or valuable. And we all do that, whether we're religious or not. Sometimes we believe in things, even if we don't necessarily have great evidence that we should be believing certain things about them. Let me try and show you what I mean here. So belief that. This is claiming that a proposition is true. So I've got some examples here. These are all religious examples of believe that statements. So you can say, I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. I believe that an omnipotent God exists. I believe that prayer works. So if you were to say those things, what you're essentially claiming is that those statements are factually correct. I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. That's like saying, I believe that that event really did happen. It actually took place. So this kind of belief is tied to rational justification. Because you're saying, essentially, for me, these things are factually true, you're then opening them up to a bit of a challenge, which is essentially proving it. And these are the kind of challenges that come from philosophy and come from reason. So let's unpack this one a little bit more. I believe that Jesus rose from the dead. So, like I just said, in other words, I believe that it is factually correct that a man named Jesus came back to life after being dead. So I've unpacked what that statement is saying there. But now we can do a challenge. We can do a few challenges. Firstly, we've got a scientific problem. All of our scientific experience tells us that that doesn't happen. Dead people coming back to life is not possible. It's not a thing. So we've got a scientific challenge there. That's a challenge that's very much based on reason, because science is based on evidence and experience, what Hume would call, and what we can call empirical evidence, evidence of our senses. We can also challenge it in a slightly different way by saying that the historical evidence in the Bible is unreliable. Now, this isn't necessarily a strictly philosophical challenge, but it can be a challenge from reason, because we could say it's reasonable to believe whatever we've got the highest quality evidence for. We don't necessarily have that because the evidence in the Gospels, yes, it's there, but we don't have any other way to verify it. We don't have a huge amount that can back it up. And then another philosophical challenge, it's problematic to believe that one-off events such as this that break the laws of nature can be true, because what we're opening ourselves up to there is the idea that the laws of nature aren't what we think they are, and that they can break almost kind of randomly or on a whim. That's difficult, because then how can we know what laws of nature are? A Christian might say that, well, the whole point of the resurrection is that it's a one-off. It's not an event like any other. But again, that doesn't seem to fit with what our reason and our experience tells us. So when we're going with a believe that statement, there's lots of challenges you can throw at it. Let's change it though. Let's make it belief in. This, as I hope you're about to see, makes it pretty different. So Price argues that actually when religious people are talking about what they believe, usually they mean this. So this is a much more personal and relational form of belief than simply saying which propositions you think are true. So this isn't really about factual statements anymore. So some examples: I believe in Jesus as Saviour. I believe in God. I believe in the power of prayer. So now we're not really working with fact. We're working with personal interpretations of the world, which is a different thing. So here's an example to try and show you how it's a different thing. Belief in is about human responses like trust, loyalty, and hope. And we all have things that we trust. We all have things that we're loyal to. We all have hopes in life. We don't necessarily know that we're right about that because we can't prove it. But whether it's trust in, the idea that your football team is going to be successful, or loyalty to a partner, or hope for a better future, we don't know that these things aren't going to let us down, but we still believe in them. So it's not relying quite so much on a simple distinction of true or false. And because it's not relying on that, it's harder to challenge. So just an example to help this land with you a little bit. If a teacher says, I believe in you, you know that they're saying something different and deeper and more meaningful than I believe that you exist. So if I say I believe that you exist, what I'm saying is I believe that you are a human person who is sitting in front of me. And that's fine because we can see whether or not that's true. But if I say I believe in you, I'm saying something different. I'm saying I trust you. I think that you're very capable. I've got faith that you will do well in your exams or whatever it is. But it's a different thing than just stating facts. So again, let's take an example to do with the resurrection. So if somebody says, I believe in Jesus's resurrection, they might be saying, this event is meaningful to me, and the message I take from it guides me in life, whether it literally occurred or not. Now, somebody who says, I believe in Jesus's resurrection, they might mean that they believe it actually happened. So they might be believing the same person as someone who phrases it as a belief that, but not necessarily. Saying that you believe in it doesn't necessarily mean you believe it literally actually happened, because you're talking about the meaning of it, the reality that it points to, if we're being kind of symbolic about it. So this is harder to challenge from a philosopher's point of view, because you can't just reduce it now down to true or false propositions. And it involves personal trust and commitment, which are not evidence-based in the same way. So to give you an idea of what I mean there, when you choose to marry someone, or when you choose to make someone your partner long term, you don't know that that is going to work out. You don't know that something bad isn't going to happen. You're not going to fall out of love. They're not going to cheat on you. They're not going to let you down. You can believe that they're not going to do those things, but you can't know it. If we only ever did things based on what we could prove and what we could know for sure, no one would ever do anything like that. So that shows that belief in is something that's quite important in everyone's life, not just in the lives of religious people. Can you have either or? Can you have both? Yes, I think you can. It's possible to have belief that without belief in. So this isn't necessarily hugely something you'll have looked at, but somebody could believe that a god or gods exist without necessarily holding any personal beliefs about that god. So some people are like that. Some people think that there's a god. They think there factually exists some sort of being called a god, but they don't necessarily have any personal religious beliefs about them. You can have it the other way around as well. So some Christians accept that Jesus' resurrection is unlikely to be literally true, but they don't think that matters, because they don't think it's really about whether it happened or not. It's about the power of God's love illustrated through the story and what that means for their lives today. And you can have both. So somebody could believe that it actually did take place, the resurrection did happen, and think that its true power is in its ability to bring Christians to eternal life. So it can be either or, it can be both. So what Price concludes, because remember what he's trying to do is show that religious beliefs don't necessarily have to be scared of being challenged by philosophy, because they're not those sorts of beliefs. He thinks that religious faith is more like belief in than belief that. So having a faith is different than simply listing a set of statements that you think are factually true. So when you do Year 2 Christianity and you look at Dawkins, Dawkins is famous for saying that religious faith is completely irrational, and that's why he kind of hates it so much. But he might be missing the point there. If Price is correct with what he says about faith is more about belief in than belief that, then Dawkins's argument falls down a little bit, because if faith isn't trying to be rational, you can't really use rationality as a weapon against it, because you sort of you're bringing the wrong kind of weapon to the fight, if that makes sense. If it's not trying to be rational, you can't really criticize it for not being rational. So what this means for you, what you can do to embed this in your essays and help you lift the level of your philosophy arguments. Showing that you understand this difference between belief in and belief that can massively help with evaluations. And like I said at the top, especially with dialogues. This is for two reasons. Not all faith claims are the same. Think about what they're saying. So, for example, a creationist is saying something very, very different than a Christian who doesn't take the book of Genesis literally. They both have beliefs about creation, but they're not the same thing. And one of them is much, much easier to challenge from a philosophical point of view than the other one. So the other thing to say is faith is probably closer to the idea of a relationship than the idea of a hypothesis. So when somebody says that they have a belief in God, what they're probably saying is that they have a relationship with God. They're not necessarily putting forward a testable hypothesis about God existing or not. Now, the arguments for the existence of God that you'll have studied in philosophy, the way they're set up, it's almost like they are putting forward a hypothesis about God. But when we dig a little bit deeper, we can ask questions about whether that's the right way to take them, or whether Anselm and Paley and Aquinas were actually trying to say, this is why I've got a relationship with God. Because if it's that one, then it's much harder to challenge. Another example that I've got on here for you is Maurice Wiles, who we come across in the miracles topic. He believes in miracles in an anti-realist sense. Anti-realist being, the idea that miracles are things that lift people's spirits, they inspire communities. But what he doesn't believe is that miracles are real world events that actually occur. So the kind of miracles that Hume is criticising, Wiles doesn't think that they're a thing either. He's got a very different view of miracles. He believes in them without believing that they happen. So to understand what I mean there, it's worth going back and looking at Wiles's anti-realist view, because it's a really, really good example for putting this into practice. Okay, finally, there are strengths and weaknesses of this distinction. So it's not necessarily true that Price's conclusion stands up, but it may do, and it may do sometimes better than others. So on the one hand, strength of it is that it does fit in well with how most religious people see the world. So for most Christians, their religion isn't just a set of statements. It isn't just ticking boxes to say, I believe this, I believe that, I believe the other. But on the other hand, you might say, well, you can't really have belief in without belief that. Surely we have to start from belief that. How can you have a relationship with God if you're iffy about whether he exists? So if we put belief that first before we can have belief in, then we can start to challenge again, because we're saying, well, prove that that's factually correct, that God exists. Another strength is that it allows for doubt. So somebody can have a strong relationship with a religious idea, even if they sometimes doubt whether it's literally true. Many, many Christians have doubts about their faith. They have doubts about things like the resurrection. They have doubts about the nature of God. But that doesn't mean that they don't have a faith at all. It's a little bit like, relationships between people can have bad times. There are times when you might question that relationship, but you stick with it anyway because it has value to you. It means something to you. But the problem is, if we completely separate faith from evidence, and this is possibly a little bit of Dawkins here, doesn't it become completely irrational? And if we just say, well, this is what I believe in it, surely that means anyone can believe anything they want without ever having to justify it or ever having to be reasonable at all. It's problematic when religious faith does become totally, utterly unreasonable, because then people can believe whatever they want with no challenge, even really harmful things. And then the final strength I want to talk about is sort of the idea that it is possible to do too much philosophy. Not every belief needs philosophical proof, so it avoids over-intellectualizing. So some Christians would say that there's almost no point of having a massive philosophical discussion about whether the resurrection took place, because we don't know, we can't know, that knowledge is not available to us, so we might as well take what we need from it and stop obsessing. But the problem with that is that a lot of Christians would say that unless certain facts are true, such as Jesus rising from the dead, what even is Christianity? You're sort of taking its legs out from under it. It doesn't have a foundation. If Christ was not raised, your faith is in vain. That's in one of St. Paul's letters. So even the early Christians were not seeing the resurrection as a metaphorical thing. It was very real to them, and there would be no religion without it. So that's me done. That was quite a long one, but well done if you stuck with me this far. This is not an easy bit of the course. This is not an easy concept to understand, but if you can get your head around it and talk about this belief in belief, that distinction in your essays, this is a really good route to a high grade, because the examiners love to see this. Okay, thanks for watching. Check out the other videos. Have a look at what else is there. If there's anything missing for the A-level course that you want covered that isn't there, leave me a comment and I'll try and do something for it. Work hard. See you next time.